Oh, hi, everybody, and welcome to Circle of Fellows for January 2023. Happy New Year to everybody. We have an August panel today to discuss certification. I'm Shel Holtz, by the way. I will be moderating this panel. Everybody on the panel has a certification, myself included. And just a reminder that if you're watching this in real time, as opposed to watching the YouTube replay or listening to the podcast, you can use that feature in YouTube to ask questions or to share comments and observations, which we would really enjoy. But in the meantime, I'd like to have the panel introduce themselves. And I'm going to ask you, in addition to your brief introduction of yourself, to share why you got certified in the first place. And we'll go clockwise as I see you on the screen, which means we're starting with Adrian in Australia.
Hey, well, it's great to be part of this one. I'm Adrian Cropley, and I run the Centre for Strategic Communication Excellence with my great partner and ex-chair of the Certification Council, Sia Papagiorgio. So I've been in IABC for many, many years, and also run my consultancy, Cropley Communications, since 2004. So I'm passionate about education and obviously certification. So it's great to be here. I got my SCMP probably now about 5 years ago. I waited a couple of years after it was first introduced. There was two reasons I got it. One is I really felt I needed to do it because it was really part of the strategy when I was IABC chair to bring the new certification program into play. But I didn't want to jump in there too quickly because I think I was terrified I might not pass. And I went, that would be really embarrassing. But to be perfectly honest, I had done my ABC years ago, and certification, having some sort of qualification for the profession itself was really important to me, and was really part of my personal brand. And I felt like, I was giving something to the clients that I work with in terms of them understanding that I'm actually qualified to do the job I'm doing.
Great. Thanks, Adrian. Priya.
So Priya Bates from Toronto, Canada, and I'm president of Inner Strength Communication, which is an internal communication employee engagement agency here in Canada. And the reason I, went after certification, I got my CMP. So first of all, it was more about curiosity than anything else. So I was, along with Brad, I think, we went and wrote the first ever CMP exams. And I think I was pretty quick. I think SCMP I got about within the year that it had launched. So just curious, wondering about the process. Did I feel that when I walked out of it that I would be able to say this really tests the knowledge and skills and expertise of a communication professional? That's what I wanted to answer. And I absolutely believe that the work that went into creating the program and then really feeling proud of having passed, because I did walk out going, I hope I passed, but I really am confident that we need to set ourselves apart as communication professionals.
Wonderful. And before we jump to Robin, I just want to share this comment from Wayne Follett, who says, hello from Eastern Canada, brand new IABC member. So
welcome, Wayne.
Welcome,
Hi, Wayne. Welcome.
Definitely welcome aboard. I think you'll have a great time here. Robin.
Mm-hmm. And I think Wayne and I follow each other on the Twitters. I think we do. So like Adrian and like Priya, I did have that moment of like, oh my goodness. Cause I remember I took a couple things. I was an advocate for certification since we first started talking about it. And when I was on the International Executive Board, we were moving through from this is a concept to it's going to become a real thing. And because I'd been an advocate, I was like, I want to be part of this. I want to be a good role model. If I'm advocating for this, and now we're at this point, we have in this case for me, SCMP exam, I'm going to take it. So I took the first exam. I forget where the conference was, but I did have that moment because I remember walking in the room and I saw people I knew, including Brad. And you walk in and you look around and you're like, oh man, because it's an extra layer. It's like, I know these people, and at some point we're all going to come out and go, I passed or I didn't. And I'm like, oh God, if I don't pass this exam, this is going to be really bad because I know half the people in this room. But that was why I did it. And I was really glad I did, and was really proud when, I got the email and the certificate came, because I've always believed, I think as we all do, that, this profession is so important. You can't not communicate, and setting a global standard, which is what I know Adrian was involved in, that some of you were involved. Like, what does that mean? I think to get to that point, I wanted to be among the first to say I did it. Not only was an advocate for it, but I did this. And there's a personal satisfaction in doing it. There's not only I passed, but I know my stuff, and having that validation that I've been tested against this rigorous process is really important. And so that was why I did it.
That's great. Thanks, Robin. And by the way, you didn't actually introduce yourself.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Sorry, I got so excited. Robin McCaslin. I'm from Dallas, Texas. I'm a senior director of corporate communications for Blue Cross and Blue Shield plans of Texas, Illinois, Oklahoma, Montana, and New Mexico. We're a health insurer in the United States.
And Brad.
And greetings from Windsor, California, Sonoma County, wine country. And despite some of the news that you may have observed, not all of California has suffered devastating effects from the tropical depression / river of water that's been headed our way. But we've had our fair share. I am doing consulting work for a number of clients around the world after having done corporate communications for far too many years. We don't even count those sorts of things. The reason I got involved with the SCMP, the CMP before that, and if you really want to go back, accreditation or even a master's degree, it's like part of it is the lifelong learning. I think we are not one of those who buy into this, well, you learn and then you do and then you retire and rest on your laurels. The thing I love most about certification is that you sort of have to keep reproving and relearning and proving that you're staying up with your profession. And to me, the other point was on all of these exercises, some of it is exactly what you were talking about, Robin. I know my stuff. You've sort of mastered some things, but the other part as you take that test is you realize what it is that you don't know, or the questions that were almost tripped you up. And so like that sets your agenda for learning for the next X number of months / years. It's like, those are tough questions. I need to go to that conference session and learn a little bit more about from so-and-so. I need to read the book on so that I can master that. And it's as much prove to yourself as it is prove to the world. What about you, Shell? Why did you get involved with this thing? And tell people where you're from.
Oh, I am Senior Director of Communications at Webcor, which is a commercial general contractor and builder. We're a California company headquartered in San Francisco. I'm coming to you today from my home office. I'm a hybrid worker, as so many are these days, in the East Bay. And like you, Brad, I did not suffer many ill effects from the weather. Some branches blown off of trees in my backyard, but we're up on a hill and water does run downhill, so no flooding here. I got certified. I have to attribute it to peer pressure, sort of subliminal peer pressure. Nobody was asking me why I wasn't doing it. But on the other hand, I was seeing all of the people I know and admire suddenly had the CMP or SCMP after their names. And I said, I really ought to do this. And Brad, like you, I find that going through this process, as I did with accreditation back in the mid 80s, it does reveal those places where there are opportunities to learn something that you realize that you don't know. So that was very valuable to me. So let's jump into the conversation. And again, for those of you who are watching live, please feel free to ask questions or share comments. I was in the meeting at a conference, this had to be maybe 11 or 12 years ago, where the certification concept was first broached. They brought in a consultant who explained why certification. And one of the things that this individual said was that organizations get accredited, people get certified. And what I see out there in the world of communication, not just from IABC with the ABC, but other communication organizations all offer accreditations. What is the difference, and what led IABC to go the certification route?
I might pick up the kind of lead that conversation, because I was going back a number of years, and it would have been that 12 years ago, Shell, when we organized a session in Chicago with a few of the senior IABC folk when we were talking about certification. Because when we put into the strategy for the board that we wanted to adopt certification and what did it need to be about, and at that time we were talking accreditation and revamping programs, but what we'd realized that there was a whole different beast in the world of certification. And so as the consultant told us, and because we had decided that we wanted to go down the path of ISO certification or accreditation, because you accredit programs, that we wanted to get something that was in line with the standard for the certification itself. So they explained it very simply, and it's exactly what you said, Shell, is that you accredit programs, but you certify individuals. And so that's the same thing when you get things like your certified nurses and so on, or certified practicing accountants. So we did quite a bit of research back in those days, and that group in Chicago was the early group that really started to look at what this new program would need to be about. And a couple of real big items as part of that is that we needed to build that certification program from the ground up. We couldn't do things like grandfathering old programs or adapting, because if we were to go with the standard, we needed to develop the standard and then assess people against that standard. So that's what's made the certification program quite a robust program.
And I think, Adrian, when you talk about the standard, that's what sticks in my head, is that, Shell, you mentioned other organizations have accreditation programs and they're administered differently, and they're all well-meaning and they all are very rigorous. However, when you talk about a standard, there's consistency. And the reason why we are now ISO accredited for our certification program, or for those who become certified, is because it is a standard. Just like any other profession, if you're, as Adrian said, an accountant, an attorney, certain medical professionals, we're a profession too, and you want to be consistent so that you're testing consistently every single time against, whatever we have defined as this is what it means to be a global communication professional. And that's the difference. And that's why we went down this path to begin with, is that it's consistent across the board. And we know that when Priya tests and Brad tests and I test and our colleagues around the world, that it's consistent. So that you really have set a standard for what is considered, what it means to be a communication professional with certain expertise.
Well, what was most interesting to me, because I did serve on the GCCC Council, which is the sort of somewhat arm's length program that puts the certification system going for IABC. We call it, sort of a project, an outgrowth of IABC. So there's some arm's length distance between the two, legally and professionally. But the thing that I was most amazed at was the professionalism that we went about in putting this thing together to meet those standards that you were talking about, Adrian and Robin. When we talk about, I'd never heard of or worked with psychometricians before, but the people who know when a test is valid. We have a separate body that sort of puts together the questions, another body that tests the questions, and psychometricians will look at the results before we even put the questions into tests. So the professionalism to be able to meet those international standards, to me, was just amazing. Some people say, well, how come you don't have a lot more people? And I think we were very, very cautious as we were moving through this thing and launching it very, very gently. And that's why we started with CMP. A few years later, we added the SCMP, the higher level. We've been, I would say, walking before we start to run, but the plans are ambitious. And I think what we've developed is something that is standing the global test and is ready to be not just an IABC program. This is going to be something that will really help the entire communications profession.
And we should probably spell out those initialisms, CMP being the communications management professional and SCMP being strategic management communication professional. So, or communication management professional. So that's what those stand for. Robin, you've referenced a global standard. Where does that come from?
Well, this is something that Adrian could speak to even better than I, but I'll start it and then I'll let him jump in. So this was around the time that Adrian was leading the International Executive Board. He and the board, they convened a group of people who set about defining what does it mean to be a communication professional globally. So, for example, each country has its own customs, mores, different way that they view ethics and compliance and things like that. Well, that's all well and good, but there are still certain standards you meet to be a medical professional, a doctor or a nurse or whatever clinician you might be. So this group of people got together and said, okay, we're going to start defining what it means if you're at, let's say, at a senior level or a mid-level. What does it mean? What things should you have? What knowledge should you have? What education should you have? What experience should you have? So that I'm working here in Dallas, Texas, but if one day I said, I'm going to up and go live in Melbourne, Australia, what does that mean? My standards and what I have learned and my experience meets the same standards that my colleagues in Australia have for being a communication professional. It's a global standard, so it's not all over the map. We're saying these are the things that matter to be a communication professional in this world. And Adrian, you probably want to expand on that.
And I'll go back even a step further, and Robin, you captured that very, very well. But what we had discovered is particularly IABC, senior IABC members over years kept talking about the global standard, and it was that thing that was unique to communication professionals as it is unique to any other industry or profession. And I asked the question back then. So where is this written down? And nobody could tell me. It was like the secret source. So we did set a task force in place to try and unpack that. And so there was, 2 years of quite intense research, understanding, and Shell, I think even you were part of some of those focus groups, is understanding what is unique to communication professionals across all disciplines of communication. So it's not looking at the specialist areas. It's saying there is a core or a standard in which all communication professionals, no matter where you are in the world and which discipline of communication you work for, concur with a particular set of standards. So that was built through the research, and then was the genesis to inform so many programs within IABC and other associations, because this was very agnostic. It's saying it's unique to communication professionals globally. And we even tested this through the Global Alliance, which is the Association for Association in Communication. And so that kind of informed that standard, which is now documented. You can get it on the IABC website, that tells you about the 6 principles and the absolute core, which is about the role of a communication professional. And so that's where that whole concept of being a profession came about. And then, of course, certification was built into that.
I remember watching many of you were on the inside building this standard. And I remember watching as a third party from the outside as it was being developed. And what I was really impressed with was the thinking and thoughtfulness that went into what that standard is. And I use it a lot when I'm presenting to my clients who want to improve how they communicate. I was really impressed with the work and the thoughtfulness, because we actually said, who are we? What do we stand for? When we talk about being a professional and communication being a profession, what does that mean? And I really was very, very thankful and grateful for the work that was done.
And to tie it back to the examination process that we're talking about on certification, the tests that you take, whether it's the CMP or the SCMP test, it goes back and tests you in those areas that show up in the global standard. And it actually, if I look on the website, the number of questions that are given to each one of these things. And it's sort of like, if you're just in the early stages in the CMP, the communication management professional, there'll be a little bit more about tactics. And that's, something that will be tested on a little bit more heavily. If you move to the strategic communication, you're going to see a lot more questions that are dealt around strategy. But that global standard is what the whole thing is based upon. It's the foundation, it's the rock, and it's the thing that has taken it to meet those global standards that we've been talking about.
One more bit of minutia before we jump into some broader topics. What is the value of having that ISO seal of approval?
Mm.
We're the only ones who have it. I mean, it's a differentiator. Everything that everybody has talked about, it was the thoughtful, long process with the foundation of the global standard. All those things, the work that went to meet what is required by the International Standards Organization was significant. And the program is run that way to continue to meet those things. It's just like being certified. You have to continue to, make sure that you're meeting those standards. Nobody else has that. You could take any program, any accreditation program, no matter how well they're built and no matter how well-meaning the organizing and overseeing bodies are, there is more room for subjectivity. Versus with ISO, you're meeting a standard and it's objective. This is an objective process. End of story. And that is one of the things that sets it apart. And because of the work of all the people on this and a lot of other people who were involved for many years, that's how we were able to achieve that. But we're the only ones who have it.
And at the end of the day, business leaders understand ISO.
Correct. Yeah. Exactly.
I was going to say, they may not understand the specifics under each ISO category, because ISO does accreditation of programs on a lot of everything. But I think the huge emphasis in the 80s and the 90s on ISO quality standards for products and services sort of set oh my God, if they clear that hurdle, there's sort of this halo effect that brings along all the other ISO programs. They are held to the highest standard sort of and global around the world. So, maybe my bosses don't know exactly what that entails in terms of communications. And maybe as someone who's going to sit down and take the exam, I don't need to understand what it is that we passed, but we are the only one. And it does meet that pretty rigorous testing.
You brought up something really is a perfect example. The company I work for now, and I was in a different role when I started there, but there were two people who interviewed me who are healthcare management professionals, because I work for a healthcare company, and they were interviewing me because my team was going to be supporting their organization with comms. And I had just gotten the SCMP because it was brand new. And of course I had it on my resume and my title, and they both asked me what it was. And same thing, they kind of look almost like, well, why would comms need that? Well, it was sort of dismissive almost. And then I launched into are you familiar with the International Standards Organization? Well, of course. And I said, well, we're working toward ISO certification. And what that means is, and I ticked through what we just talked about, and they went, oh, then it was a completely different conversation. That's not what got me hired, but it was a great conversation to say, well, why wouldn't communication professionals be certified just like any other profession? And they had to stop and think about it.
I'm sure it didn't hurt.
Oh no! Well, maybe it helped. I don't know.
Well, we have a question here from Wayne, so let's jump into that because it's a good one. Wayne says, looking at the 5 domains you're assessed on for the CMP, if an individual has less experience in one or more domains, would you suggest they build experience first before taking the test?
I think that's a really good question, and that's a question that comes up a lot from people that are stepping into doing that. The reality is, when you look at the certification, and because it's split down into a number of the domains that you're tested against, there's a ton of resources out there where you don't have to do too much, particularly if you've got the experience and you meet all of the pre-qualifications to actually sit the test. I'd go ahead and do it. Absolutely. As Brad mentioned earlier, there's a ton of resources, the books, even the Circle of Fellows now is aligned with supporting that education journey towards certification. But the real focus of certification is it's not about having the bar so high to actually get through the exam. It is actually about the ongoing training development that you need to sit to maintain the certification. So you generally will find that, if it's one domain that you're missing in, you can kind of SWAT for it, if that's a term you all use. But you can also, you look through the whole lot and you go, okay, I'm fairly strong in these areas, maybe not as strong in this one. That's the one I might focus on, but don't let it be a barrier to stepping in and doing that certification.
And I would mention the cheat that some of us have done. And so people who might want to take the exam. And I said, going back to that whole fear thing, I remember being on the plane on the way to World Conference where we were having the first SCMP exam and thinking, either you have the knowledge or you don't. But when I looked at those areas we were being tested on, I went, but I don't feel like I'm as strong in a couple of these areas because they're not a daily part of my job. Doesn't mean they don't come into play. They're just not a daily part of my job. So I literally went and looked up best practices in a couple of those areas on the internet, on the plane, and what that did, it was not that I gave myself a crash course, because that's not what it was about, but it made me feel more confident because I went, oh, I know this. Of course I know these. Of course I know these things. Did I probably miss some questions in those areas? Probably. But it just reminded me that it's like, you actually do know these things. It's just because they don't come into practice in your daily job. So I always recommend people, I'm like, there are a lot of things you can do, to feel good before you take this exam. But that's also kind of a nice, quick way to kind of remind yourself that you know more than you think you do, or more than you are conscious of on a daily basis. You know this stuff.
And that does get into the how do you prep for the exam. We can maybe touch on that at some point, because everybody is different in terms of their skill set and how they go about doing things. I also have said on many times, this is not the kind of test that you can study for in terms of memorizing stuff. It's applied knowledge. It's mainly philosophical, the approach to doing some things. And bear in mind also that it's multiple choice. So oftentimes when you sit down and look at a question and there's 4 answers, you go, well, it's not that, and let's flip a coin to see whether it's that or that, if you don't know. But I think the interesting part about communications is, because these, as you alluded to, Robin, these fields somewhat overlap. And so maybe you haven't been doing media relations every single day, but you probably have worked with people who are in media relations, or you have some sense of what it is that they're doing. You might be able to handle a media relations question, even though that's not a part of your job. So I think you've hit upon too, the Circle of Fellows broadcasts that we've recorded, we tie them back to some of these domains of knowledge that you might want to brush up on. You can go and Google a topic and you can get a book on this sort of stuff. Sometimes IABC chapters will put together study groups, so you group-wise prep for an exam. So there are many ways to go about boning up on those areas where you feel you need to be shored up before you go and explore it. I think sometimes also just jumping in, like Adrian said, and taking it is a good way to find out whether maybe you already have mastered it. And, if you spend a whole year getting ready for it and find, oh, that was easy. Maybe you said, why did I waste that whole last year?
Yeah, if you pass, I was just going to say, if you pass, you might find that you actually are ready to start doing media relations when you were skeptical about your capabilities before that.
And Shell, it's really about having that confidence, because I know, as Brad was talking, the thing is, being a communication professional, we go back to that global standard. What we found is what's unique across disciplines. And what we tend to do is look, well, I'm a specialist in internal communications. I know nothing about media relations, but the principles of communication are the same. And so we put that block and that fear in place because we think we don't know it. And then you'll sit in the exam and go, oh my God, I kind of nailed those questions that I didn't think I was going to get, because it's just not my area of expertise.
Now, I believe today, it wasn't available when I took the exam, but I believe the IABC Academy does have a course to prep for the CMP. I don't think it has one for the SCMP yet, but there is a course. So there are materials available. The handbook, the organizational handbook that I guess we just wrote recently, provides a lot of feedback, content as well across all of our disciplines. So there are materials. The Midas Touch Guide, I always mention too. It's not called the Midas Touch Guide anymore. Is it called something else, Brad? I'm not sure.
It is something about that. Yeah.
Whatever, the gold quill. If you
how to win a gold quill.
We just dated ourselves. Yeah. So how to win a gold quill. That has a lot of content on how to write a strategic plan. So there is a lot and of course the code of ethics, which I think is, for our profession, having a code of ethics, especially in this world of misinformation and disinformation, is really important. So they're important building blocks that we need to understand and we need to learn. And if there are pieces like metrics and measurement that you don't understand, it won't hurt you to learn.
And there's a practice exam. The practice exams pretty darn good to do.
Just like the DMV.
Yes.
Exactly.
The interesting part to me is that in this conversation so far, and we're halfway into our hour, we did a survey of people who have successfully passed the exams, people who haven't taken the exams, to find out why did they go about doing this thing? What is it? And tremendous shout out to Sia Papagiorgio, who really led the movement to get this thing taken care of, your coworker, Adrian. And we found that there were sort of three main categories into which people fell. One was that they wanted the confidence to be able to do things. And we've just brushed up against that. That you take it, you pass it, you go, wow, I can do this sort of stuff. Another part was the credentials. And I think, Robin, you hit upon that. I mean, you were talking to some people in a hospital who were, had their credentials within their industry. And there's some industries where credentials are absolutely necessary and more important than other places. But maybe you need that postnomials to be able to slap after your name, to be able to establish something in terms of that credentials. And then with that, and very, very closely tied, is the whole notion of credibility. Somehow the knowing that you have met global standards that are pervasive in this industry, no matter where it is that you're practicing, that leads you into being more confident, and you've got the credentials to prove it. So I think those 3 C's as the reasons, again, the reason you might want to do it might be different than the person who works, down the street from you, but probably one of those 3 will ring true to you.
Well, and to build on what you said, Brad, if I'm like, you're in consulting, right? And all of you are, in fact, if I'm going to hire somebody, if I need to hire a consultant, if I see that credential behind the name, that might be the differentiator. If I have people who all look pretty qualified, but if I say, hey, Brad, what's that SCMP about? And you explain that to me and that you have to recertify and all that, I'm like, am I going to hire the consultant who has that and keeps up his or her skills and knowledge and stays current in our profession, versus somebody who maybe has not done that or been tested against the rigor that we're tested against? To me, that's another differentiator. And I'm like, even if all people look great, I'm like, this person takes the time to stay current and tests against it, et cetera, I'm probably going to hire that person.
I was a certified public accountant for many years, but I let it drop about a decade ago. I don't really need to stay up on top of the tax laws.
I think I'd rather have myself.
I got the
A
basics.
doctor, a surgeon, I don't know, yeah.
I used to be a board certified surgeon.
Yeah.
Just a quick shout out. They're running the survey again this year for certification. So Sia said that's coming up again this year, which is great. So we're constantly learning about the program and being able to make changes.
Yeah, and
I was just going to throw in a comment from Wayne, who thanked us for the help. He said, I signed up right away for IABC's mentorship program, which starts next week. So I'm sure my mentor will be helpful in this also. I know through IABC San Francisco, I am currently a mentor to a young communicator, and the relationship, I think, is valuable on both ends. So that would probably be a worthwhile activity to consider, is looking at that program.
Well, and one of the reasons that survey that you talked about, then repeating it, is we want to start getting more data that's specific to the communications profession and people who have been certified. Because if you look at certification across all sorts of disciplines, whether it's accountancy or insurance, or there are people even who are certified elevator repair people or some such thing, and certified mechanics for automobiles. When you start looking at some of the data that comes from those other industries, you find things like they're more likely to be shortlisted on an interview process. They're more likely to be hired. If, again, sort of all things being equal, the certified one is probably going to be ahead of the pack. We have found in, again, other industries that certification will often lead to pay increases that might come out of the blue, or maybe promotions. So what we want to do is establish that more so than just sort of hearsay, but can we come up with quantitative stuff to be able to say that, because we've seen it in other industries, you're 16% more likely to be able to receive a pay increase if you go through certification than somebody who's not certified, all else being equal. So we're trying to establish that same sort of demographic quantitative data to be able to help you make that decision and make that case that goes beyond the, it feels good, I want the certification, I need the confidence.
I think it's also a little bit of the type of person who's going to put themselves up and test themselves against the standard is the type of person who's also going to ask for those things, who has dreams, who has visions of their impact. And I think it tells you a little bit about the type of person who wants to step up and say, I'm certified against a global standard. I am a professional.
I want to talk about that recertification for a couple of minutes. I know my brother-in-law is a dentist, and he has to take a certain number of courses every year. He has to get credits, a certain number of credits, in order to maintain his dental license. How does the recertification work with IABC certification process?
Oh, there's several categories. What we're doing today counts because we're sharing knowledge. So that's one of the categories. It's like you all talked about mentoring. If you demonstrate as part of your, we should talk about the process. You are reminded through IABC that, this is coming up, but you have a portal you go into and there's several categories set up. And what's the point total? Is it 40 points? I should remember this since I have to do it every year. I think it's 40 points. And there are things like, have you attended professional development this year? That counts for, up to X number of hours. Have you spoken? If you're a public speaker and you share your knowledge that way, that's, have you read books related to the profession and then how you document that? Are you a mentor? Things like this where you're giving back. I'm leaving out a bunch of them y'all can share, but there are a number, other things that you do to keep yourself current.
Right.
Volunteerism too, as in that counts very much. It's interesting though. I look at the process each year, and it takes literally half an hour, if that 15 minutes. I think it took me 1 year just to go back through the records and say, oh my gosh, I got these points really easy just by attending conference or speaking at conference or being a mentor to someone, publishing an article. And as you said, Robin, there's a plethora of stuff that you can do that counts. It goes back to that absolute principle that Brad said very early in the piece, and it's that ongoing learning and development. And this is what set the certification process on the right track, and why we went down the ISO path as well. Because if you look at other professions, you would hate a doctor that got to their qualification and then never restudied on advances in medicine. And communication is a forever changing industry, profession, and we need to stay up to date. So the whole point of certification is not having this huge high bar to pass. It's that ongoing commitment. So I think the recertification is an important issue.
And I would just add one thing, that yes, it is easy to do that. And I'm bad. I don't go into the system and do it as like at the beginning of this year, I should go in and start doing it. I don't, but I have a folder on my Mac that I'm looking at you on right now. And I put those things in there. Like I was at World Conference, I was a speaker, and I want to make the point that it is easy to do, but it's not, you can't fake it either. So you can't go, well, I'm just going to tell them I read a bunch of books. Well, you have to document things, right? So you have to prove through your receipt that you were at conference, or like Shell was a speaker at World Conference. Like there's easy ways to document it with images, with links, with things like that. You do have to prove it. But the process of doing that, if you're doing ongoing professional development, is not hard. Like you said, once you've saved up that stuff or whatever, it's really easy to resubmit your recertification.
And I'm probably like the rest of you, that you're done within the first 3 months, right? Yeah. You get your 40 points with what you've done in the 3 months time. I never finished the year. Yeah. Well, because as soon as I've gotten to 40 points, I'm like, okay, that's enough, and I'll send it through.
The other thing that was really nice to be able to watch from the GCCC board level was our willingness to sort of change the categories, especially during the last couple of years. So much of it when it was set up was are you going to the local chapter meeting, and that counts for certain points? Are you going to a regional or world conference? Are you doing a lot of in-person kinds of things that disappeared from all of our diets around the world? So a lot of the virtual things got plugged in sort of in addition to. So When you look at lists, realize that there's a little bit of flexibility around this thing, that it doesn't have to be exactly that. You may have been able to substitute watching a 1-hour replay of a webinar of some sort instead of I went to that meeting that was usually in person every single year. So think very, very broadly, because that's the way the people who are looking at these recertifications are looking at what you've done.
The GCCC is labeled an initiative of IABC. It is not available only to IABC members. Why was that decision made? And have we seen a lot of non-members sit for the exam?
Can I jump in straight onto that one? Because it was a very deliberate move to do that. And one of the things we actually learned from the old accreditation program is that you needed to have a separate lens on your standard. You needed to have a different group and a different committee. When we looked at ISO and getting that certification, what was one of the big requirements is that it has to sit separate from things like board decisions or board interference that was to do with the business. And when we looked at the landscape of communication across the world, every accreditation program was linked back into the particular association. So strategically, we said what we want to be able to do is build the profession. We got a ton of pushback from academics that had this huge debate around you can't call yourself a profession, you can't call yourself communication professional because you don't have a standard and you don't have a qualification. Well, this was the step to do this. So it was very purposeful to have that in place and be able to start, working towards making sure that we are seen as a profession, and we wanted the certification to be open to anybody. It's really interesting. One specific case study is now we're partnering with a Berge, is it, in Brazil? Brad, you might know a little bit more about this. And as another association, to look at doing that certification. We have seen others. In fact, the early committees for the GCCC is not just made up of IABC members. It's members within the profession. So I think what we're going to see over time is that other associations will adopt it as their preferred certification, or individuals who don't even belong to an association will be taking it, because it is absolutely independent of. Great initiative from IABC, but I think all associations, their job is to bring that development into the profession as a whole.
And if you just
have we seen a lot of non-IABC members?
Not yet.
For the exam? Not yet.
Not yet. And part of that was, I think, our close ties to IABC. You almost had to be at a chapter that was promoting this thing. You probably studied with an IABC chapter. You may have taken the exam at an IABC chapter or a regional or a World Conference event. One of the best things that happened to us in this last year was that we now have remote proctoring, sort of spurred along a little bit by COVID, but now you can take this test no matter where you are in the world, no matter what time of day, no matter what time zone, all that sort of fun stuff. And I think that is going to make this idea of we can reach far beyond those who are current IABC members to that much larger population of people who practice communications around the world. We now sort of have got the track record. It's working. We've tested it. We've had it looked at by psychometricians, and now we're able to deliver it to the comfort of your home office / whatever. And I think that is going to open up. But I think the other piece that will help, and you alluded to this, Adrian, is that we can go to other associations who are members of this global alliance and say, you don't have a certification, you don't have accreditation. We've got a program for you, and you can offer it to your members. It's ISO standard. It is global. It meets all the criteria, and it's a turnkey thing.
And I believe Sia just told us, one of the things she shared with us is that there is a recent partnership with a Berge in Brazil. which is a Global Alliance member, and they're pursuing similar partnerships with other Global Alliance
It's a
members.
great
as well.
organization. I used to spend a weekend every summer down there teaching part of a certificate program in communication for executives.
And they're absolutely huge.
Wonderful
They're
group.
Yeah. Well, you'd think Brazil. Yeah. And by the way, the remote proctoring, my boss got her SCMP, and that's how she did it. And I remember, and she told me she was doing it, and I said, you'll pass, you'll be fine, But I remember her texting me on Teams, going, I passed. I was like, what do you got? And she did it remote because she's busy. Yeah.
And there's a couple of things. Remote proctoring will change the way, as you said, Brad, as to who can now take, and it takes it away from being, the IABC folk at chapters that are taking people through it to making it available. And I think that's been the real terrific strategy of the GCCC over the last couple of years, is being able to make this accessible to individuals. The other one that I heard that was absolutely fabulous is tailoring the pricing structure, because there are many countries around the world that it looks unaffordable when you're paying in US dollars and the price that it is. So same with our membership in IABC and the way that we charge that. It's the same with certification. So then it's tailored to the different parts of the world in line with global PPP, as they call it, the parity in pricing.
It makes me think of that line that we said a lot, and I think I see it still in some IABC language, which is, we're here for the greater good of the profession. Bottom line, like, you can be an IABC member or not. You may belong to something else, but really our philosophy is, we're here for the greater good of our profession, regardless of where you are, where you belong, where you live. End of story.
And I think the other contrast is, and many of you were on the accredited side of things. You had to be an IABC member to become accredited by IABC. And if you left, you lost your accreditation. This is something that will travel with you through your profession. And our hope is that if maybe you weren't an IABC member when you took this, you might be attracted to IABC for the networking, for the professional development, for some of these wonderful things that we offer. But membership is not a prereq for being able to sit for this exam that'll bring you some of that credentials, credibility, and confidence.
Well, let's get down to brass tacks here. How many questions do you have to get right to pass?
75 out of 100, isn't it?
And that's on both the CMP and the SCMP.
Yeah.
So
yes,
75%.
And
my math is right.
Yeah, 75%. That's it. I'm glad. You see, we have to make math easy for communication professionals, and mathematics is not part of the test.
It's not. Well, that's true. It's not part of
no
the
math
test.
in the test. I can attest to that.
I have to use math in my job every day, unfortunately.
No, most business communication professionals.
Of course we do.
But the good thing is, and this is a great thing and a good tip when you're doing the exam too, is because there is 25% you can get wrong, it's having the confidence to go, right, let me go through the exam, because it's all online as well. You can actually sort through and go, right, it's not coming to me right at the moment. Let's skip that question, go on to the next one. And it keeps a track of where you're up to. So when you're taking the exam yourself, it's not about keeping in mind that I can get them wrong, but you've got a couple of things at play for you. So you can skip, you can come back, but also it's multiple choice. So there's going to be a percentage of questions where you go, I am really stuck between these two choices. I know two are out, but these two choices, you've got a 50% chance of getting it right, even if you fluke it. So why you've got 100 questions here that go through, because there's rigor in the process, but there's also the opportunity to kind of go, well, look, I can get 25 wrong. Nobody's going to question that one or check on it or come back to you and say you're a dud because you got this particular question wrong. But you've got that. There's a couple of things working for you when you're actually doing the exam yourself, and there's plenty of time to do the exam in.
There's one other thing, and we're humans, so we're very diverse. But it was my experience, and it might have been yours too, that when I got stuck on a question, I'm like, I have no idea, and I can't even rule out two of them. In your brain, you start going, I can't. And now you're spending like 5 minutes on one question. I'm exaggerating, but I think what you described, Adrian, is really important. It's like, if you're not getting it, definitely move away from it, because as you have finished the rest of the exam and you come back to it, now you're feeling like, oh, okay, I've answered 90 questions. There's just 10 I need to go back and look at. I found that when I did that and I got away from it, came back to it, I went, oh, I know that one. Like I was stumped. I was completely stumped and then went, oh, that's absolutely this, because I got stuck on some phrasing in the question, which is really dumb. So I think you just have to be calm and go, okay, move on.
And some of the questions are also, you mentioned they're multiple choice, Adrian. Some of them are picking the best from among a set of right answers.
Correct.
Which some people find challenging. I do want to share another comment from Wayne, who says he completed a 2-year diploma program in PR in December 2022. Is it likely that education would qualify as training as well as to meet the 40 clock hours of training? And I know part of that answer is that it has to be training you completed in the last year, right? You can't go back and say, well, I did something years ago, so that's part of my recertification effort. But beyond that, how would you answer Wayne's question?
I think the answer is yes.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, we do have a team that goes through and looks at everything that's down, but certainly anything, classes, whether they're university or privately run, anything on the professional development side, generally is like, yep, we count that. Go ahead.
So I was just going to say, and separate recertification from application.
Correct.
Of process is the big thing. So if you haven't stepped into the process, absolutely a diploma in PR counts towards it. But then the recertification will come down the track, which has to be in the last year.
The other thing that you mentioned, which having been in the rooms with some of you when you're taking exams, it's a 3-hour time limit, and most people are usually done by about 2 hours. So it's not quite that pressure cooker, oh my God, kind of thing that you get sometimes with an examination of any sort. And I think the other piece is that, because it is multiple choice, the scoring happens very, very quickly. Accreditation, it used to be often if you sat for an exam and you were writing things and typing things and turning it in, it would be sometimes months before people would have read the thing over, graded the thing, determined whether this, you find out, I think we sort of say within a week, but oftentimes it's before you leave the room, you've received an email saying, guess what? Congratulations, you passed. So that sort of closure on success is a whole lot quicker than it used to be. And 3 hours is usually adequate for 100 questions for, I would say, the vast majority of people who are taking the test.
And I would say take the time. Like, you're right. I think I finished mine at about 2 hours. But because you have the time, take 15 minutes, whatever time you need, because you have 3 hours. Anything you feel uncertain about, because once you hit submit, you're done, right? You can't go back and retrieve it. So I would take the time on anything you felt uncertain about. Go reread it, because you can still change your answer, because you got the time. So
it's the 24 questions that Adrian had trouble with.
And I think the one thing I'd add, we want to make sure that anyone who's watching this, who's a communication professional, who works in communication, is going to feel comfortable going in and taking the exam. But it's not to say that the exam is easy, right? What was very, very clear to me is that, we go into work and everyone says they're a communicator. They are communicators, but they think they can do what we can do. And that is everyone we walk into a room with believes that. But there is a discipline and a profession and an approach to how we do our work strategically. And so you have to be that person who knows their stuff to pass the exam.
There's a difference between a communicator and a communication professional.
Correct. Yeah. Correct.
And that's a really good point to pick up on, Priya, because sitting the SCMP exam is a very different beast, because it is very much, there could be a number of right answers, but they are the most strategic or the most appropriate for the situation. So it's being very thoughtful as you're going through that. And generally, if you hit the qualification to sit that exam, you're generally prepared. If you don't know your stuff going into this, it's going to take a while to get to that.
If you're the communicator who writes the story, just writes and makes it look pretty, you're going to struggle with the exam.
Yeah. But and I think when Adrian and Shell, you both brought up that point, if there are several right answers, that's also speaking to, that's not exactly what you're being tested on. If you're a more senior communication professional, it's how you're deciding which course of action to take, right? If you're presented with a dilemma, There might be 3 or 4 ways you can approach it, but which is the most right approach in the circumstance that you're given, because that's part of being a more senior professional, is being able to make that call.
Let me also.
Wayne says, thank you all for this. You've minimized my symptoms of imposter syndrome mightily.
Good.
This is something I'm familiar with. I have a question. This whole process started with the CMP. The SCMP came later. Are there more certifications in the works?
There certainly have been discussions.
You want to jump in because you were.
Yeah, I was on the board, and I think it was one of those where we can't do everything all at once. Aspect and remote proctoring. First, getting the thing up and getting it certified or accredited by ISO was the first priority. The second priority is getting remote proctoring in place. But not far behind is a discussion of maybe there ought to be one that doesn't require as many years of experience and all of the learning that one puts in. So I'll call it sort of the entry level certification that perhaps maybe not right out of school, but maybe a year or 2 of experience under your belt, you'd be able to sit for something like that might be a little bit easier and would be sort of at the entry level. There were some discussions of something at the high end as well, but I think the next one you're likely to see, and there's no promises on when it might happen, would be for the new kids on the block and welcoming them to be able to have that same sort of, I took the exam, I've got the credential, I've got the confidence, now I can go on and climb up that G-triple-C ladder.
I think that foundational level is going to be a game changer for the association, because you think about when I was doing PR, my PR school, it wasn't a degree program in the 90s. It was a 1-year certificate that you did after you got your university degree. It just did not exist in Canada. And I think about the multiple numbers of programs across the country that are available today, that to see some of those professionals come out of those programs and get certified as a communication professional, I think will be incredible when they come up with what those standards are to test against it.
I couldn't agree more. And it's very much that focus on post, degree, getting out in the workforce, being embedded in the workforce, and then getting a certification. I mean, and let's face it, earlier in your career, you're very hungry for qualifications and building your personal brand. We can't escape the fact that as much as this is a certification and a standard, you're really hungry for it earlier in your career. You can become less hungry for it the later in your career you are. You're like, okay, I'm done with this now. I might go on and do an MBA at that higher level, or go back and do a doctorate or something like that. But generally, those qualifications are important at that early career.
We've talked about what motivated each of us to take the exam, and we've conveyed some other reasons that you might want to take the exam. What would you tell somebody who is skeptical or hesitant about pursuing the certification?
I think if you're hesitant, like Wayne was talking about, go and do the test. If you work in the profession, if you provide advice, if you provide counsel from a communication perspective, choose whether it's your CMP or your SCMP, but there's a good chance you're going to qualify and pass that test. So if you're hesitant, if you're skeptical, I think that's an interesting conversation. There are some skeptics that you're not going to move over, but I think it really, I've always said we need the volume in order to drive the value of so let's get, if you talk to a human resources professional, every single one of them has no doubt that they're going to be churl or SHURL, is it strategic or certified, right? Human resources leaders. There's no doubt with with the people I work with in if you're a CPA, it's a requirement. You just have to do it.
Right.
And
I would say,
and I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there because we are down to about a minute, and I have a couple of other things that I have to say. One of those is to thank Anna Willie for her behind-the-scenes work in coordinating and organizing these panels. The other is to let you all know about next month's Circle of Fellows, which is going to be the 89th episode of Circle of Fellows. It's scheduled for 10 a.m. Eastern time. Oh my God, I've got to do this at 7 a.m. Pacific time on Thursday, February 16th. And that early hour is to accommodate a participant from the Philippines who will be joining us. The panel includes Amanda Hamilton Atwell from South Africa, Todd Hattori here on the West Coast, Marianne McCauley, also here on the West Coast, Martha Muzichka in Eastern Canada, and Ritzi Ronquillo from the Philippines. The topic is advising and leading, and apparently there's a lot of interest in that topic. So I hope everybody watching will join us for that installment of Circle of Fellows. I want to thank the panelists for a lively and robust discussion, and see you all next month.
Hi, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.